Stacy realized the truth. It was already far too late. It started small. Faint spells, dizziness. Moments where Stacy said she felt her heart slowing down like a clock losing time. At first, doctors thought it was stress, maybe exhaustion from raising two little girls. But soon the symptoms grew darker. Her pulse would drop without warning. Her blood pressure would plummet. And there were nights when Joshua said he found her barely breathing. He told paramedics exactly what to do, using the calm authority of a man who worked in medicine. Each time she survived. Each time he was there to explain it all. In 2013, after the birth of her first daughter, Stacy was rushed to the hospital with an unexplained collapse. Tests came back normal. 5 months. For 32-year-old Stacy Hunsucker, September 23, 2018, was supposed to be just another quiet Sunday night in Mount Holly, North Carolina. Her two daughters were asleep. Her husband, Joshua, said he had stepped outside for a moment, just to check if the cars were locked. When he came back, Stacy was slumped over the couch, unresponsive. 4 different stories would follow in the next 24 hours, 4 versions of the same discovery. None of them true. Within 48 hours, her body was cremated. No autopsy, no questions asked. A young mother gone. A husband strangely calm. And a community left wondering what really happened behind the closed doors of that house. Because this wasn't a tragedy as it was a plan. Stay with me. This is the story of how a perfect husband turned a bottle of eye drops into murder. At first glance, everything about Stacy Hunsucker's life looked perfect. She was 32, a mother of 2 little girls, Piper and Willow, and married to her high school sweetheart, Joshua. The family lived in a quiet neighborhood in Mount Holly, North Carolina, the kind of place where the grass was trimmed just right and the mailman knew everyone by name. Stacy was the kind of woman people admired, patient, warm, endlessly giving. She taught preschool, loved crafting wooden signs for friends, and never missed a single birthday call. Her friends would later say she was the glue that held everyone together. But beneath that picture of peace and stability, something had started to fracture. Stacy had been sick for years, in ways doctors couldn't explain. Fainting spells, dangerously low heart rates, sudden collapses that came and went without warning. In public, she smiled through it, but those close to her noticed the change. Her once bright energy had faded into quiet exhaustion. At home, Joshua took charge of her medications, her appointments, her diet, even who she spoke to. He told people he was helping, that he was protecting her from stress. But his control ran deeper than anyone realized. Stacy, trusting and kind by nature, didn't question it. She wanted peace, not confrontation. Friends said she always tried to see the best in people, even when that goodness wasn't there. To her, Joshua was still the man she fell in love with at 18, the strong, confident paramedic who promised to keep her safe. But love can be a dangerous thing when it blinds you to fear. By 2018, Stacy's world had quietly shrunk. Her hobbies faded, her laughter rarer. She spent more and more time at home, surrounded by medications she couldn't pronounce, battling symptoms no one could trace. And Joshua, always calm, always ready with an explanation. "It's her heart," he'd say. "She's fragile." But he was the only one who seemed certain. There was something in his certainty that didn't sit right. Not with her mother, not with her friends. They couldn't name it, but they felt it. The kind of unease you get when everything looks fine but feels wrong. Because sometimes the most dangerous people aren't the ones who scream. They're the ones who smile while they slowly take everything from you. And by the time Stacy realized the truth, it was already far too late. It started small. Faint spells, dizziness. Moments where Stacy said she felt her heart slowing down like a clock losing time. At first, doctors thought it was stress, maybe exhaustion from raising 2 little girls. But soon the symptoms grew darker. Her pulse would drop without warning. Her blood pressure would plummet. And there were nights when Joshua said he found her barely breathing. He told paramedics exactly what to do, using the calm authority of a man who worked in medicine. Each time she survived. Each time he was there to explain it all. In 2013, after the birth of her first daughter, Stacy was rushed to the hospital with an unexplained collapse. Tests came back normal. 5 months later, a fire destroyed their home. A tragedy that left them reeling both emotionally and financially. Joshua set up a GoFundMe, and neighbors donated to help them rebuild. On the page, he wrote that Stacy's health was mysterious and fragile, setting the stage for what would later look like a long, tragic battle. Over the next few years, Stacy's body became a battleground no one could understand. She was admitted to intensive care again and again. Her heart rate sank so low that doctors finally implanted a pacemaker, an extraordinary measure for someone barely 30. They searched for answers, but nothing fit. Every test, every scan came back clean. "It's just her heart," Joshua would tell them, shaking his head. It's unpredictable. And because he was a flight paramedic, people believed him. He spoke their language. He knew the terms, the symptoms, the protocols. But what no one saw was that the man comforting the doctors was also the one creating the sickness. Every unexplained episode, every collapse was a dose, small, precise, deliberate. The poison he chose was common, almost invisible. A few drops slipped into her drink could slow her heart, mimic natural failure, and leave no trace in routine tests. It was perfect. Stacy began to feel trapped in her own body, convinced that she was somehow failing, that something deep inside her was broken. She would apologize to Joshua for being a burden, tell her mother she was sorry for always worrying everyone, and Joshua would hold her hand, stroke her hair and say, "It's okay, honey. We'll get through this." But there was never an us, there was only him, writing a story in which her death would seem inevitable. For 5 years, she lived on borrowed time, never realizing that the person she trusted most was quietly rehearsing her final act. September 23rd, 2018. It was supposed to be an ordinary Sunday night. The girls were asleep. The house was quiet. Stacy sat on the couch, texting her mom, planning to meet the next day. At 10:30 p.m., Joshua called 911. His voice was calm, almost rehearsed. "My wife's not breathing," he said. "I think she just passed out." When paramedics arrived, they found Stacy slumped forward on the couch, her lips blue, her skin cold. Joshua stood nearby, his shirt unwrinkled, his voice steady, explaining what had happened like a professional reading from a script. But what he said kept changing. To the police, he claimed he had stepped outside to lock the cars, a precaution, he said, after some recent neighborhood break-ins. To a friend, he said he'd been walking around the block to burn off energy. To another, that he'd been cutting wood in the backyard for craft signs. And to Stacy's mother, Susie, he told a fourth version. He'd been sitting at the kitchen table working on his laptop, and when he turned around, she was gone. 4 stories. One body, no emotion. The paramedics tried everything, but it was too late. Her pacemaker showed no electrical activity. At 11:12 p.m., Stacy Robinson Hunsucker was pronounced dead. The official cause, cardiac arrest. A tragic natural death, or so it seemed. Joshua refused an autopsy. He said she'd suffered enough, that it was cruel to cut her open. And because he worked in the medical field, because everyone believed he knew what he was talking about, no one questioned it. Within 48 hours, her body was cremated, faster than most families even begin funeral plans. No coroner, no toxicology, no evidence. Just ashes. 2 days after the cremation, Joshua filed a life insurance claim. $250,000, 2 policies, both in his name. To friends, he played the part of a grieving husband. But those who saw him noticed something strange. He wasn't crying. He wasn't breaking down. He was fine. Too fine, he laughed at jokes. He talked about buying a new boat. And within weeks, there was someone new. A woman named Jennifer, his co-worker. The woman he'd been seeing long before Stacy died. To the outside world, he was moving on. To Stacy's family, it felt like he had never grieved at all. Because deep down they knew this wasn't grief, it was relief. And for a man who thought he'd planned the perfect crime, the next move was already in motion. In the hours after Stacy's death, Joshua didn't act like a man who had just lost the love of his life. He acted like someone following a checklist. At 1 a.m., while the house was still dark and the girls slept down the hall, he picked up her phone and began typing. Text messages were sent to family and friends, short, odd, and cold. "I'm okay, just tired," one read. Another said, "Going to rest for a while, talk later." The words didn't sound like Stacy at all. They sounded like someone pretending to be her. But Joshua knew that if people received a message, no one would ask questions right away. When morning came, he started cleaning. He washed the clothes he'd worn that night, scrubbed the kitchen and took out several heavy trash bags before sunrise. The neighbors saw him hanging laundry at dawn, methodical, quiet, as if tidying up after a long day instead of a sudden death. Hours later, he packed his caravan and told everyone he was going on their honeymoon alone. He said it was what Stacy would have wanted, a trip to clear his head. While he drove off toward the coast, Stacy's ashes were barely cool. At home, police were beginning to wonder why a funeral had happened so fast. But Joshua played the grieving husband perfectly. He posted smiling photos of his daughters, thanked everyone for their prayers, and kept repeating one line, "She's at peace now." To most people, he seemed calm, strong, even admirable. But calm isn't always strength. Sometimes it's calculation, because just days later, he decorated the house for Halloween, stringing orange lights and fake cobwebs in the same kitchen where his wife had taken her last breath. The image was grotesque, celebration hanging over silence. When detectives finally searched the home, they found traces of bleach in the drains and one odd smear near a cupboard door. Joshua had hidden her body there, only to move it later when he realized police might return. By then he thought he was untouchable. He'd destroyed the evidence, claimed the insurance, and replaced Stacy with someone new. He believed the story was over. But what he didn't know was that one small vial of preserved blood, taken before her cremation for organ donation, was about to expose everything. Stay with me, because what came next would turn this from a tragedy into one of the most chilling true crime stories ever told. 9 months had passed since Stacy's death, when her mother, Susie Robinson, decided she couldn't stay silent any longer. Every night, she replayed the same thoughts, the strange calm in Joshua's voice, the rush to cremate her daughter, the way the story kept changing. A mother knows when something doesn't fit. So Susie picked up the phone and filed a report, not with the police, but with the Department of Insurance. It sounded strange, almost trivial at first, a possible insurance fraud claim. But that one call would break open everything. Investigators began digging through Joshua's financial records and medical files. What they found made no sense. The insurance payout had been processed just 2 days after the cremation. There were receipts for an expensive boat, luxury trips, and home renovations. No trace of grief, only gain. But the most important discovery came from a detail no one thought mattered: the fact that Stacy was an organ donor. Before her cremation, a small vial of her blood had been preserved, stored away as standard procedure. Joshua couldn't have known it still existed. When toxicologists tested it, the results stunned everyone. The blood showed abnormally high levels of tetrahydrozoline, the active chemical in eye drops, 30 to 40 times higher than a normal dose. Not something that could happen by accident. It was poison, administered slowly, methodically, over time. The pattern matched her entire medical history: the low heart rates, the collapses, the cardiac arrest. It wasn't random. It was planned. Joshua, a trained flight paramedic, had the knowledge, the access, and the control. He'd built a 5-year illusion, turning his wife into a medical mystery while covering his own tracks. Investigators confronted him, but he denied everything. He said the results were wrong, that Stacy had always been fragile, but the science didn't lie. The same substance had been used just weeks earlier in another high-profile poisoning case nearby, the Lana Sue Clayton murder. Joshua had studied it, copied it, and thought he'd get away with it. But he hadn't counted on a single drop of preserved blood. His one mistake, his one loose end. When detectives showed Susie the report, she cried not because of relief, but because she'd been right all along. Her daughter hadn't died from a weak heart. She'd been murdered by the man she trusted most. And in that moment, justice began to breathe again. This wasn't just evidence. It was Stacy's final heartbeat speaking for her from beyond the grave. Stay with me, because what happened next will show just how far this man was willing to go to silence the truth and the people who dared to seek it. When the toxicology results came back, there was no doubt left. This was murder. Investigators traced the purchase of multiple bottles of eye drops to Joshua's local pharmacy. Surveillance footage showed him at the counter, paying in cash. The dates matched Stacy's final months. Every clue fit together like pieces of a nightmare puzzle he had built himself. On December 19, 2019, police surrounded his Mount Holly home. He was calm when they took him in, almost polite, like a man confident he could still talk his way out of it. "Oh, you're making a mistake," he said. "She was sick for years." But as the officers read him his rights, Joshua's mask began to slip. Behind the calm tone was a cold calculation, the same precision he'd used to poison his wife. He was charged with first-degree murder and insurance fraud. The world finally saw what Stacy's family had known all along, a man with no soul behind his smile. For a moment, it felt like justice had arrived. But Joshua wasn't done. Just days before Christmas, he posted a $1.5 million bond and walked free. The same man who had murdered his wife was back in the community, smiling for cameras, pretending to grieve, attending church with his daughters as if nothing had ever happened. For Stacy's parents, it was torture. They would see him at their granddaughter's school events, standing there in the crowd, waving like an ordinary father. But at night, he drove by their house, parked across the street, and just stared. He photographed them. He sent anonymous packages to their door, notes that said, "Let it go and you're next." The man who had taken their daughter now stalked their lives, taunting them with her memory. He wasn't content with killing Stacy. He wanted to destroy everyone who had dared to seek the truth. And when that didn't work, he escalated. In February 2023, Joshua staged his own kidnapping. He called police, claiming that Stacy's father, John Robinson, had ambushed him while he was changing a tire, zip-tied his hands, and injected him with a drug. He even showed scratches and fake bruises. But detectives saw through it within hours. The wounds were self-inflicted. The entire story was a fabrication, a desperate attempt to frame his in-laws and shift the narrative. Yet even that wasn't the end. A few weeks later, his 11-year-old daughter was rushed to the hospital after collapsing at home. Tests revealed the same chemical found in her mother's system, tetrahydrozoline. The drug Joshua had once used to kill his wife was now in his child's blood. He told doctors it must have been an accident. Maybe she used the wrong drops. But nobody believed him anymore. The truth was clear. Joshua hadn't just lost control, he had never had it to begin with. The mask of the caring husband, the grieving father, the hero paramedic, every part of it was a lie. He was a man driven not by grief, but by obsession, power, and the belief that he could outsmart everyone. And for years he almost did. After the truth emerged from the blood test tube, the aftershocks of the case spread in endless waves. Neighbors recalled seeing Stacy clutching her chest, her lips blue, and Joshua standing nearby, calmly explaining in the voice of a seasoned healthcare worker. Friends spoke of fundraisers, bonding, BBQs, birthday cards Stacy never forgot. Now white flowers, candles, and prayers. At Joshua's office, colleagues confessed they didn't see the pain in his eyes after the funeral. What they saw was a man who had chosen to erase the past and rewrite the present as he saw fit. For the family, the grief turned into an unwanted routine, working with investigators, reading toxicology reports line by line, signing insurance claims, and trying to answer those childish questions every night. When will mommy be home? When the police pieced together the puzzle, the eye drop receipts, the CCTV, the bogus text messages, the speed with which the cremation was handled, the insurance claim, they saw a deliberate, long-winded, coldly calculated criminal path. But justice, however steadfast, did not immediately heal a house devoid of laughter. Some nights, Susie woke from the same dream. Stacy calling to say she was tired, then the signal went dead. She got up, reached for the phone as she had years ago, only to remember that the number now lay dormant under a different stretch of sky. The community was furious. How could the system have missed so many signs? The inexplicable repeated emergency calls, the unusually thick medical records, a husband who always showed up on schedule, and an unusually quick cremation. At the local church, the minister spoke of moral masks, that evil doesn't always snarl. Most of the time it smiles at the right times and speaks well. The court noted a chilling string of post-mortem actions, staged assaults to frame his in-laws, stalking, threatening packages, and the hospitalization of a child with the same poison that killed his mother, a moral slippery slope that showed the killer was willing to erase all witnesses, including his own child's memories. "This wasn't a flash of emotion," the prosecutor said bluntly during a hearing. "This was not a flash of emotion. It was a project." The project began with odorless drops, ballooned into a fake medical history, and ended with cremated remains and pre-filled insurance forms. The lesson was clear. Love is not immune to control, Expert knowledge can be a weapon, and silence, whether out of fear or trust, can condemn a person to fate. In the family album, a picture of Stacy smiling brightly at the beach is placed between two pictures of her daughter receiving her school award, a 3-panel frame that perfectly captures why justice must work, not just to punish the wicked, but so that children grow up knowing that the truth eventually finds its way. And at the end of each day, as the house closes, the grandparents whisper to their grandchildren, "Your mother didn't leave because she was weak. She was betrayed by the person who was supposed to protect her." In the silence that follows is an unforgettable reminder. If someone around you is fading away under the weight of plausible excuses, ask one more question, take one closer look, because sometimes a timely question can be a lifesaver. When the courtroom finally fell silent, Joshua sat motionless. The man who once wore a medic's uniform, who held lives in his hands, was now just another inmate in an orange jumpsuit. The jury took less than 4 hours to convict him of murder. He didn't flinch when the verdict was read. No apology, no tears. Just the same blank stare he'd given the paramedics the night Stacy died. The judge called him a practiced liar, a predator hiding behind charm, and sentenced him to life in prison with a minimum term of 21 years. But even that didn't feel like enough. In the gallery, Stacy's mother, Susie, clutched her husband's hand. When the sentence was announced, she whispered only one thing. We finally heard her voice. Because in the end, it was Stacy's own blood, the evidence she never knew she'd leave behind, that spoke louder than Joshua's lies. Outside the courthouse, friends, neighbors, and the same community that had once raised money for her recovery now gathered to celebrate justice. They released white balloons, each one carrying a message written in her daughter's handwriting. "I love you, Mom, I miss you." Those two little girls, Piper and Willow, would grow up knowing their mother didn't die because she was weak, but because she trusted someone who didn't deserve it. Susie and John Robinson now raised them, trying to give them a life filled with the same kindness Stacy showed the world. But some wounds never close. There's still a room in their house where Stacy's photos hang, her laughing at the beach, her holding her newborns, her face bright and open. A reminder of everything she was and everything she should have had. The story of Stacy Hunsucker isn't just about a murder. It's about the quiet ways control creeps in, how love can be weaponized, and how danger can wear a familiar smile. It's about a system that missed every warning sign until it was too late. And it's about one mother's courage to speak when no one else would. Because sometimes justice doesn't come from the living, it comes from those who refuse to be forgotten. Remember Stacy not for how she died, but for how she lived, with warmth, generosity, and the kind of love that never truly fades. And if you or someone you know is living in fear, please speak up. One phone call can save a life. One voice can stop a tragedy before it begins. Let her story be the reason another one never has to be told.
Nụ cười ngày cưới chắc chắn phải là Invisalign.
Cùng Hà thử ngay bí quyết mới từ phở cung đình.
For 32-year-old Stacy Hunsucker, September 23, 2018. For 32-year-old Stacy Hunsucker, September 23, 2018, was supposed to be just another quiet Sunday night in Mount Holly, North Carolina. Her two daughters were asleep. Her husband, Joshua, said he had stepped outside for a moment, only to move it later when he realized the cars might return. When he came back, he thought he was slumped over the couch, unresponsive. He'd destroyed the evidence. 4 different stories would follow in the next 24 hours. Four versions of the same discovery. But what he didn't know was that one small vial of preserved blood was cremated, taken before her cremation for all questions asked. A young mother to expose everything. A husband strangely calm. And a community left wondering turned this from a tragedy into one of the most chilling true crime stories ever told. Because this wasn't a tragedy. 9 months has passed since Stacy's death. Stay with me. When her mother, this is the story of how a perfect husband decided she couldn't stay silent drops into murder. Every night, at first glance, she replayed everything about Stacy Hunsucker's life. A strange calm in Joshua's voice. He was rushed to cremate her daughter, a mother of 2. The way the story kept changing, Willow, and married to her high school sweetheart Joshua. The family lived in a quiet neighborhood in Mount Holly into murder. The kind of place where the grass was trimmed, everything about Stacy Hunsucker's life, strange calm in Joshua's voice. He was rushed to cremate her daughter, mother of 2. The way the story kept changing, warm endlessly, and married to her high school sweetheart Joshua. She taught preschool, loved crime. The family lived in a quiet neighborhood in Mount Holly. The grass was trimmed, strange calm in Joshua's voice. He was rushed to Stacy's daughter, mother of 2. The way the story kept changing, warm endlessly, and married to her high school sweetheart Joshua in ways doctors loved. The family lived in a quiet neighborhood in Mount Holly.